Dealing with non-agile folks is a really important topic and something that very regularly comes up when we are either introducing Agile for the first time to folks and they're getting it and they want to get started with it, but also when we're helping them along their journey. They're sort of one of the frustrations about learning a little bit about Agile is why isn't everybody doing this? And so how do we help them with that process? I think one thing that is useful is to think about who it is that we are needing to work with. Is it colleagues and peers that are not agile? Is it the middle management that we're working with, or is it indeed the leadership and the stakeholders? In another video, we'll look at the users from the perspective of what if they're not agile. But for the purposes of this, let's focus in on these. Before we sort of look at each one of those individually, let's just take a look at what I look at, the way I approach the adoption journey, the way I approach everybody in this process. The first thing I do, the first E, is to explain. Very often, just explaining Agile, if you can explain it well, that is enough for people to get started with it. I know many stories of people who started Agile. Their first introduction to Agile was a very brief introduction, in the morning, and by the afternoon, they got on and were cracking with it. Another example of somebody, the way they started Agile was they literally read the Agile Manifesto. That was it. That's all they needed. They got cracking with it, and they actually used that as their guide, which I think is brilliant, by the way, as their guide to being Agile. Others have read the Scrum Guide, whichever iteration that they were using at the time. They read that, and that was enough to help them because they had an instinct for it already. And I think most of us who are sort of getting excited about Agile probably have a yearning for it. We always are wondering that there should be a better way than this bureaucracy that we're surrounded by. So explaining sometimes is just enough. Every now and again, we need to provide evidence. Maybe the explaining isn't quite enough, so we need evidence as well. And to start with, probably the evidence would come from the outside world. So if we're talking to an organization, we can show other organizations which are using Agile and how and why, and tell those stories and show them those case studies. But as soon as possible, you want that evidence to be internal where possible. And if the evidence can come from your own experiences as well, that's even better, because we can really talk to that with passion. The next way to help somebody to move into the Agile is to help them experience it. To do this, however, we need to take away risk and we need to take away fear. So what I like to do is I like to help people understand this, again, through stories, through case studies, through practical examples that we can see around the place. Often we'll be discussing it over a cup of coffee, so I actually use the process of creating a cup of coffee for somebody as the approach to, as to show them what it means to be Agile. But we're trying to get them to experience it. And so if we can do that in a non-risky way, all the better. One way I do that is to show them how they can do something around the home, for example, or in their hobby, so that they're not risking anything, or in their mind risking something at work that may lead to a bad result if they think it may lead to a bad result. And then once they've been able to experience it, another way, by the way, is through games. We do it's a really good fun to run some Agile games to show people what it feels like. Once people are doing that, then hopefully what they'll start to do is to explore it, and they'll start to explore Agile into all sorts of different areas of work and home life. As well. And obviously we're constantly modeling, we're constantly experimenting, and we're constantly coaching. So as a general principle, I think of this approach here to help somebody on their journey. But let's go back to the individual sort of groups of people that we need to talk about. With colleagues and peers, hopefully it should be easy enough to have a conversation with them, but that conversation needs to be one where we are trying to find out where they're at. It's important to go to where they're at and help them from there to move to Agile. If we try and impose Agile on people, if we try and ram it down their throats, as much as we may want to, because we know it's so great, as much as we want to do that, that's just going to put the barriers up, and they're going to be even more resistant to what it is we're doing. So find out why they're resistant. Maybe they've got one of the myths in their heads about it. So we can sort of dispel those by pointing them to case studies, to examples, and so on. Introduce them to some videos, introduce them to some blogs, some of the podcasts that we've suggested as well, or a great book, some simple books on that. I find that is really the best way. Find out what their medium is, ask them how would they prefer to absorb information, and then provide them with just one or two. You just need one or two little things to one or two examples to help them get started with that. If we're dealing with middle management, what we tend to find is that this group tends to be very, very fearful of Agile if they don't understand it, because they're listening for the sorts of things like, oh, autonomous teams, are cross-functional, self-organizing, therefore they don't need management, they don't need managing, and so on. So of course they become very, very afraid very quickly, and what happens there is that they will then resist it because they don't want to lose their jobs and so on. One thing, the way I tend to deal with that is to help explain that if we move to Agile and they join us on that journey, they're going to realize that there's going to be a hell of a lot of work for them to do. We know that, for example, around planning, there is so much more planning that is needed when we are working in an Agile way, because we are continually replanning, and certainly the team hasn't got time to do that. The teams that are working haven't got time to do that. The product owners and Scrum Masters need all the help they can get. So middle management could be absolutely ideally positioned to help with this, and to start to be that link between the teams and the leadership and the stakeholders. So there's a massive role for them. The other thing is that as we gain all the productivities that we're expecting, I would say that, somewhere between 30 and 125% productivity increases. Of course, we're expecting organizations to therefore become more successful and grow. And if they're doing that, then we're going to need those people to be around, people who understand the history of the organization and so on. It shouldn't be a fear thing. But again, we need to find out where they are, why they're fearful, why they're resistant, and help them on that journey. And then the last group here is leadership and stakeholders. Similar a little bit to middle management in that they could be some fear, but normally it's just a lack of understanding. What is happening there is that they are very used to receiving reports and acting and behaving in a certain way towards work, towards their staff, towards the workforce, and so we need to be able to help them move to a place where they are behaving and expecting things in an agile way. Certainly, as you will see in some later videos, we talk about if we could move finance to Agile, and if we could move HR to Agile, then all the reporting that we're doing and all of the performance management that we're doing will be Agile, and that will drive the right behaviors. But with leadership and stakeholders, what I do, and this is something that is, I think, probably the best way, is that when you get asked for something, the first time you get asked for it, deliver it as best you can in the way that it is being asked for. And that's what I tend to do. And then what I would do is I'll then say, once they're happy with the report, with whatever it is that we're providing them, then say, so I'm glad you're happy with that. Just to let you know, that took the following amount of time to create, to deliver it to you. And although we may get a little bit faster in future iterations, or in future weeks or months, probably there are better ways of getting you the information that you're looking for. Would we be open to discussing that? And then we help them with those conversations to show them that actually looking at reports, looking at static PowerPoints, for example, is not as efficient and as effective as looking at either the actual data from the system, or actually looking at the product as it's coming out of the sprint. So if we can get our leadership to move into the sprint demo and look at that as their evidence, then that would be fantastic. That will be in line, of course, with the manifesto values and principles. And there are great books that explain how to do that. I'll put some links down below. But one of them is is called Doing Agile Right, where in there they talk about the executives of very, very big companies who changed their behavior and decided to walk the halls, walk the floors, and go and meet the people where they were doing the work, rather than moving all the information up to the ivory tower of the boardroom. So there are ways to do that. There's going to be a whole new section, a whole new pathway looking at leadership and explaining to leaders and stakeholders how they can get more out of agility. But a few ideas there for us to get started with. But basically, remember, we can't force this on people. We need to find out where they are, take them with us, and give them the examples that we have, and let them feel it, let them experiment with it. And as soon as they grasp it, you'll see that they will just fly. It will be quite exciting.